Houston Real Estate Radio starts right now.
Welcome back. You're listening to Houston Real Estate Radio. I'm your host, Shannon Register.
I'm James Brown. Last week we talked about the mortgage settlement that was reached a couple of weeks ago. Can you tell us a little bit more about what a person can do if they weren't one of the five banks that had a mortgage with one of the other banks, other than the five banks that were in the settlement?
Well, I think it's very important to go back through all the paperwork you have, because on these foreclosures that happened, especially in Texas, you have to remember Texas is a very debtor-friendly state. And by that, what I mean is when this state was founded, it was by a bunch of people running away from the East Coast who didn't want to pay their bills. So when we started this state, it was designed to protect the people, okay? And along those lines, foreclosures requires significant procedural steps before they can go down to, especially if you're in Harris County, they have to take it down to the Family Law Center, post their notice, and then have their hearing on the first Tuesday of the month. So what you're dealing with is a very strict set of guidelines. So going back through your paperwork to find out, did they actually send me the proper notice? Did they properly accelerate the debt? Did they properly give the required time frame to post my property for foreclosure? Did they actually do it? I mean, there legitimately has to be someone that goes down there that reads aloud the foreclosure notice and opens it up for people to bid on. There's all kinds of things that must be done, and if they're not done, the foreclosure is not proper. So going through your paperwork is predominantly important. Is one of the first things I'd want to do. If I've had these calls come in, they say, "Hey, my property is about to be foreclosed. What can we do?" Well, I say, gather your paperwork, come see me. And we sit down and we want to establish all the language, because you have to go back to the original deed of trust, all the language in the substitute trustee's deed. You have to go through it all to make sure that what the bank did was appropriate. And if it isn't, you've got an ability to stop the foreclosure. Okay.
Now, I've had some clients come in and they started with Bank of America, but the loan was bundled and sold. And by the time they got to the end, it was some company they never heard of that was foreclosing on them. And would they be able to sue Bank of America and get in on this class action suit? Or are they dealing with the actual, which I suspect, the company that actually did foreclose on them in the end?
Likely they can't go after Bank of America, because traditionally when those assets are sold, the new bank who's buying it assumes all the liabilities connected with it. So even if you were able to go after Bank of America would be able to turn it around on whoever's the current mortgage holder. And so probably doubtful. I can't say for sure, because unfortunately, it's kind of my lawyer speak, but I've always got to look at the documents to make sure where we are. But more likely than not, I would have to say no. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't look into it. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't spend the time. I mean, I routinely visit with clients potential clients, and visit with them for hours. It doesn't cost them a dime, because I just want to try and make sure they know what their options are. Because I think that's the most important thing that we can do to help consumers and help the general public. Because these are big issues that they're likely, and I hate to say it, but they're likely uneducated on.
Right.
And you not only have the education, but the practice in those areas to understand where the little nooks and crannies are to make sure that you're getting the best result for them that you can. And it starts with the documents, it starts with the meeting, and that's about it.
And I've got to say, there are some people out there, some consumers who, I am not kidding you, I have seen them live in a house after they have stopped making payments for 14, 15 months. And they deserve to be foreclosed on, in my opinion. I mean, they have not, they've not paid their bills, and the banks let them live there because the bank took, time to foreclose on them and whatnot. So the people that we're really talking about here are people who were foreclosed on, but we're not given the proper time frames for moving out and for being to get their notice. I mean, this isn't your average foreclosure where the bank did follow procedure and I guess I just want to clarify that, because there are a lot of people who were legitimately foreclosed on.
Right.
But then there are just a few who the banks didn't follow their procedures and things were, not done correctly. Because I've known people like that where, they got foreclosed on so quickly, all their stuff was left in the house, and then they have to go back in. Sometimes they weren't even allowed to go back in and get their stuff. So, I think there are two sides of that. And
that's a great clarification, because what you're talking about are people who have actually defaulted.
Correct.
And the default is they have failed to make their monthly mortgage payment for a significant amount of time, to the point where the bank is able to accelerate the debt and foreclose. And I think James and I were talking about is there are some people that they were making their payments, but because it got transferred to 3 or 4 different mortgage brokers or lenders, and who kept buying the assets and moving it along, while they may be making payments, their account's not getting credited correctly because they made payments to 3 companies ago, where it's now a new company that they don't know about because they haven't received proper notice that their mortgage has been assigned. They're making the payments, or they're late 1 month only because they didn't know who to send it to. Those are the people that need the help. I agree with you. Or the people that, again, proper procedures weren't followed, they got foreclosed on for not an appropriate reason. Those are the people that need the help. But if you haven't paid, you signed a contract to make a monthly payment. If you don't pay, unfortunately, you deserve to get foreclosed on.
I know. I'd be happy if I could live somewhere for 14 months and then they kick me to the street. I'd be like, hey, 14 months of free rent, right?
I had 2 people come to me over the past 5 or 6 years. 2 cases have come up to my attention where, the people were proceeding with a short sale. Everything the bank told them to do, they were doing it. Their house had dropped in value, or their financial situation had changed and they could no longer afford the payments. So they were doing the things to do to get the short sale going. And it had, in some cases it was on the market. In other cases it wasn't yet on the market, whatever. But in the meantime, the other department across the hall at the bank was proceeding with the foreclosure. So, they're doing everything the banks tell them to do. And on the other side of the hall, the bank's continuing with the foreclosure and they lose their house, even though they were cooperating fully with what the bank had asked them to do.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that.
And that does happen. It's the right hand not knowing what the left hand's doing. And, as a homeowner, I've run across those issues for a bunch of homeowners I've represented. And legitimately, there's a couple ways to combat that. My favorite thing to do that I recommend to my homeowners is get comfortable with sending a certified letter, okay? Once you start your process with the short sale department, send a certified letter to the mortgage servicing side where you're making your payments that says, here's what's going on, here's who I'm communicating with, this is what's going on. I want you to know and to understand where we're going. So that way they can't claim a lack of knowledge, because oftentimes that's what they try and do. They say, well, you still have this obligation. I don't care what the other department says. We're the mortgage department. You still need to pay us, and if you don't, we're proceeding. Well, that's not true. And if you do it the right way, you can really protect yourself. Another avenue, is I've had this happen, and I've actually done this before down in Harris County. I haven't had the chance to do it in Montgomery County yet, but quite frankly, I had to file a restraining order. I went ahead and sought injunctive relief on behalf of one of my clients just to stop the foreclosure from happening so that we could get to the short sale. And then the short sale happened, everything closed, and the lawsuit went away. Now, that was a substantial property. There was a lot of different things going on, but there are remedies. There are ways to get it accomplished. Sometimes it's more expensive than you want it to be. Sometimes it's more time-consuming than you want it to be. But you do have options. And you just got to be willing to pursue them.
Another reason sometimes that land gets taken away from people is through condemnation. We see a lot of that in Texas, especially where they're building new roads. Are you seeing a lot of that?
I am. We do quite a bit of condemnation work. I'm involved in a couple different road construction projects. Actually, 2 of the biggest ones in Dallas are private and public partnerships with TxDOT. And so I'm involved in that. But I'm also involved from a property owner's perspective, especially around Houston. And what I've seen, unfortunately, is that the government decides they want your land. They want to pay the smallest amount of money possible to take it from you. And unless you're willing to go fight it down to the county commissioner's court, they're going to get away with it. I've seen the variance be multi-millions of dollars. I've seen the variance be $10,000 or $20,000. That also involves getting a really good appraiser involved to figure out what the fair market value of the property is worth at the time of the taking. and working it out. I know you guys will be shocked to know that the government usually has a substantially lower number than the number you come up with, but that is just something that you have to be willing to battle for. And oftentimes it is well within the property owner's benefit to take that fight to the courthouse, because you're going to recover a tremendous amount of money generally to get to that fair market value.
So do you find that in most cases, if the homeowner goes out and fights, they do get more money, and if they don't fight, then that they just settle with it? I mean, do they usually win, though, when they try to get more money?
In my experience, the answer is yes.
Okay.
I can't speak for everybody else, but when we've handled the condemnation proceedings, we've always felt very good about the results and our clients have felt very good about it. But it takes someone who's willing to take on that fight. But with the right amount of money, and with the fact that some of these properties have been in families for generations.
Right.
And so it's a little offensive to have the government just say, we're going to take it from you now. So you better get your appropriate fair market value for it.
That's, and you see all the construction going along as they widen 610, and they've widened I-10, and they're working on 290 now, and all that property along the sides of those roads are just eminent domain now all of a sudden, and you've got to give it up. And yeah, you definitely want to get your right price.
I agree. Because it's going to continue, especially like you said, over the 290 I-10 area. There was a tremendous amount of work over there, and when they redid the I-10 corridor, there's a tremendous amount of condemnation work going on.
I know a couple of people weren't happy, and they voiced it very vocally, in the media.
We're going to have to go to break and hear a word from our sponsors, but when we come back, we actually have a professor from Texas A&M University coming on to talk to us about some of these transportation issues. So we'll be right back, and thank you, Ian, for coming on. He was bringing some great information for our listening audience. You're listening to Houston Real Estate Radio.